tuned. The stream is about to begin.
All right, my English teacher friends, I got a killer activity for us today. Welcome to Focus Lab. So in recent years, especially the post-COVID years, educational pundits have been, hammering upon us the engagement gap, and a lot of us teachers say, kids just won't engage. And I find myself to be a relatively entertaining teacher. I think I'm funny at least. And, my kids will engage, my bottom 10%, typically don't do much of anything anyways. But this year in particular, I noticed the biggest paucity in education, and it's focus. There's a direct correlation between a student's grade, I think, and this is especially true of my AP classes. So their focus and their grade. And my students that really have trouble focusing tend to suffer in the grade department a little bit. So what I have for us in this workshop is a Focus Lab Stations activity. So the students are going to go through 10 stations. It takes 10 minutes apiece. I'll walk you through those stations in just a little bit. And then we're going to do an FRQ3 style AP Lang argument essay, and I'll walk you through that writing workshop as well. It's pretty interesting. So I've run this exercise already this year, and my students say hands down the most fun, most engaging unit that I've created. So I hope you enjoy this one. All right, ELA teacher friends, let's first start with the overview. So Focus Lab is a stations-based activity designed to help students strengthen one of the most important academic skills, sustained attention. Students rotate through a series of independent challenges, including puzzles, games, observation tasks, and copywork that require patience, concentration, and perseverance. While each station presents a different task, all share the same objective: remaining engaged with a single activity for an extended period of time. So I'll run through the rules and all the setup in just a second, but that's kind of the forerunner to the whole activity. Here's the rationale behind it, all right, why I schemed up this activity. Today's students are growing up in a world filled with notifications, instant gratification, and constant distractions. As a result, many struggle to maintain attention when faced with challenging or tedious tasks. Yet nearly every meaningful academic endeavor, whether it be reading a novel, annotating a text, solving a problem, or writing an essay, requires sustained focus. Focus Lab provides students with an opportunity to practice concentration in a low-stakes environment. The purpose is not necessarily to complete every challenge successfully. Rather, it is to develop the habits of patience, persistence, and mental endurance. Through repeated exposure to tasks that require careful attention, students become more aware of their own focus habits and learn strategies for remaining engaged when work becomes difficult. So one of the things that I did to set the stage for this, I showed a little clip. It's like an 8-minute YouTube video. I'll put links to it in the description, of an 85-year-old man talking about the virtues of boredom. I'm 51 years old, and I know very well in my childhood, I said to my parents many times, I'm so bored, and they would just say, go entertain yourself. And I think that's lost on this generation, right? We're very prone, and I know this as well. I was saying to a colleague the other day, I think my ability to read has been greatly hampered by social media and my phone. I notice that when I read every like 7 minutes or so, I reach for my phone. I never did that 10, 20, 30 years ago. And I play guitar. I'm a novice guitar player, been playing for like 6 years. And I know when I get really frustrated, boom, that phone comes out. And I think the same is true for our kids. So here are the rules that I gave my students before we launched the stations activity. So the first thing is you have to maintain complete silence. This is a silent activity, no talking, whispering, or communicating with other students during station rotations. I actually have a clipboard, and I was deducting 2 points every time a kid spoke. And surprisingly, when I told them that I would be doing that, I had no talkers out of 3 sections. So that's 76 kids. And not a single one of them talked for the duration of all 10 stations. I thought they were really engrossed and engaged in the activity. So you have to remain at your assigned station. Students must stay at their assigned station for the entire, I said 15-minute session here. I found 15 minutes to be too long, so I reduced it to 10. Number 3, stay engaged. The goal is sustained focus. Continue working even when a task becomes challenging, frustrating, or repetitive. Number 4, no phones, electronic devices, Chromebooks, nothing. It all went in the backpack and under the desk, and they complied with me on that. Number 5, work independently. So some of the stations like the Tic-Tac-Toe and the Connect 4 are collaborative, the Jigsaw as well, but you're working solo in great essence. And then the biggie, this cost me $42.17 to set up. I just went to Dollar General and got all my supplies. Respect the materials. I didn't want anything broken. I didn't want anything lost. I have a little bit of school budget, but I exhausted it this year. So I paid for it myself, and I think it was money well invested. Number 7, there's reflection sheets that I want them to fill out after each station. And I just printed them and had them on my center table. And at the end of every 10 minutes, we filled those out. There's a link to that document in the video description for you as well. All right. So the goal of Focus Lab is not speed, competition, or even completion. The goal is simple. Train your brain to stay focused on one task for 10 uninterrupted minutes. So let me run you through the 10 stations. Number 1, Rubik's Cube. Number 2, do you remember these old things? The water ring toss. Dollar General had a bunch of those, so I bought 7 or 8 of them. And trick for this one, I realize you have to fill it to the brim, otherwise it doesn't work. So my first go through with that, we actually had to pause and go fill them up. I have a jigsaw puzzle and a center table in my room, and students work in groups of like 4 or 5 to complete that. And I got 100-piece puzzles. Usually in 10 minutes, they come pretty close to completing the whole 100-piece. I bought a collection of Where's Waldo books. So Dollar General had a stack of 5 of them. And again, at each station, kids are in groups of 4 or 5. So that was perfect. Paper maze. I couldn't find this. So at Dollar General, they used to have them. So I went with crossword puzzles and coloring stations. So I got some of those adult coloring books instead of the paper maze, and they're working on that at this particular station. Number 6 is the crossword puzzle. I got some pretty challenging ones. And then copy a famous speech. So I have a Martin Luther King speech, the I Have a Dream speech, and kids just need to write that down, handwrite it, the whole thing. Number 8 is still life drawing. So I have a bunch of weird artifacts in my room. So I have this ceramic raccoon, an apple that I got for my tenure, and a plant, and they're still life drawing that. Number 9 is tic-tac-toe. And number 10 is Connect 4, okay? So every 10 minutes we switch, fill out the reflection sheet, and then they just rotate clockwise through the stations. So my room is relatively small, so I laid out 5 stations at a time, and after we completed the first 5, I rotated the next 5 in. So ultimately, this is going to culminate in an essay. And as I alluded to earlier, it's going to be set up like an FRQ3 on the AP Lang exam. So here's my prompt. Cal Newport, author of Deep Work, argues that we are living in a world where attention is the new scarcity. Write an essay that develops your position on Newport's claim. Do you agree, disagree, or qualify the assertion that attention has become a scarce resource in modern society? In your response, you should, and it's all the typical AP stuff. I don't need to read it. So you guys can check that out. It's just, how to organize it, use standard English, blah, 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 all that stuff. So the big thing is that they're going to be drawing from their personal experience from the focus lab. All right. And it's going to be a 4-paragraph essay, intro, 2 bodies, and a conclusion. So as always with my students, I like to Bob Ross my instruction and show them a clear model or a few models in terms of how to construct this. So the first question becomes, so how do I write the introductory paragraph? For this one, I found that my heuristic for the inverted thesis works the best. So you end with the thesis, right? And you begin with context and background up top. I want to see a smattering of tier 2 level vocabulary in it. And what I mean by that is just your average run-of-the-mill SAT level caliber words. Don't overly geek out, but it is an academic paper. We've been working on sentence constructs all year. So they don't really have an issue with that anymore. And I have a ton of stuff in my YouTube channel if you want to do a deep dive into the 12 sentence types and the 20 sentence patterns. Active verbs, and then the big thing is set the GPS. So it's a 4-paragraph essay. So I like it when my kids kind of hint. They don't need to be doggedly explicit to this, but you hint at where you're going at in body paragraph 1 and body paragraph number 2. So let's see a couple examples that I wrote just to unpack this and kind of demystify it for you. So number 1 for the introductory paragraph looks like this. And they're all going to be 4 sentences long, all right? So every intro is 4 sentences long. Falling short of having a bucket of Ritalin at the threshold of every classroom I walk into, Focus Lab made one thing abundantly clear. I have the attention span of a gnat. Not only is my concentration scattered, but I cannot hold a clear thought for more than a nanosecond. Call it a generational downside, but I came out of the womb destined to be a screenager. In order to make honing in possible, I need to disengage from my device and learn the art of tenacity and perseverance. So that GPS is set in the last sentence, the thesis is in the last sentence, and the first 3 sentences just tend to be background and context. So a smattering of tier 2 in this. The sentence constructs are all cooking. There's no parallelism going on in it. And at this stage of the year, my kids are pretty good with their grammar, punctuation, syntax, because I hammer that home a lot. So let's see it again. So I wrote 3 introductions. That's usually what I do. And then we pause and I say, on your mark, get set, go, do your intro. So 3 tends to be the magic number. So here is number 2. While my classmates bounced around the room like caffeinated pinballs, Focus Lab felt surprisingly comfortable. Whether solving a Rubik's Cube, completing a maze, or drawing a still life, I found myself settling into each task rather than searching for the next distraction. The experience reminded me that sustained attention is not a superpower, but a habit that must be practiced consistently. In order to maintain strong focus, individuals must limit the distractions competing for their attention and cultivate the discipline necessary to persevere through challenging tasks. So in all of these, as I was writing them, I think it was easiest to set the GPS in the last sentence and drop the thesis in the last sentence. So it's like a 3+1. Context background gets 3, and then thesis and GPS in the last sentence for the 1. So let's see it one more time. As advertised, I do it 3 times. If my attention span were a dog, it would be a squirrel chasing beagle that slipped its leash sometime around that 3rd period. Thanks to smartphones, social media, and a never-ending parade of notifications, focusing on a single task for more than a few minutes feels like yeoman's work. After completing Focus Lab, however, I realized that my inability to concentrate is not merely a personal flaw, but a symptom of a larger cultural problem. In order to reclaim my attention, I must first disconnect from the distractions that constantly compete for it, then develop the perseverance necessary to remain engaged when tasks become difficult. So after our reflections, I would write on the board sort of what were the successes and pitfalls that they were running into. And we drew from that discussion as possible thesis topics and possible GPS coordinate points. So the next question becomes, how do I do the introduction? And, how do I do the body paragraphs? And what I do with this is something called the syllogistic method. And it's an Aristotelian heuristic. It comes from Aristotle, and he ran a school called the Lyceum, and the rich town boys would go there to learn about polemics, oration, debate, wordsmithing, word wrangling, and they would often tussle with, these juicy questions like, what is justice? Which is the essential question of Plato's Republic. And he noticed that some students argued very well, some were men, some were really scatterbrained. And he said, what are my better students doing? And he kind of opened up the lid of their brain and studied their internal machinations. And he had a eureka moment and he said, aha, I got it. They are thinking syllogistically. And all that means is that you're going from premise to conclusion. So if I were to say arsenic is deadly, you would all nod your head and say, yep, Christian, you are correct. And then in writing, we always need our textual support. So that would be like a topic sentence. If I were to say, my dog ate arsenic and gave you the following context. I went into my kitchen this morning to make a cup of coffee, and out of the corner of my eye, I see Pickles, my dog, underneath the kitchen counter, and I say, oh no, Pickles, and he pulls out his head, and all over his muzzle and his grizzle, he's got white powder. And if I told you that last night I put arsenic beneath my kitchen sink because I have a rat infestation problem, logically you're going to conclude something. The fate of Pickles, it ain't so good. Pickles is probably going to die. So morbid example, but you get the sense of what a syllogism is. In terms of writing, here's what it looks like. The first premise is an argument containing a why reason. In the thesis, you don't really delineate the whys. And there's some math to this. I like it when my students take 3 sentences to write that why reason, because I don't want them getting too summative in their statements. I want them to keep their argument central. And old school synthesis essay on the AP Lang exam used to say a couple of times, your argument must be central. And I still like keeping that rule, even though that language has disappeared. In the 4th sentence begins the second premise, and this is where you bring in your textual support. So a lot of it's going to be self-reflection and talking about the stations, etc. In the conclusion, you link and loop back to the prompt and the thesis. So what's a first premise look like? I use stems early in the academic year, and they are this. There's a reason why, or there are a couple of reasons why. If a kid says there is a reason why, it usually sets them up to articulate a why reason, and that's what we're shooting for. So it's kind of elementary and basic, but it works, and here's an example of one with the stem. There is a clear reason as to why my focus is scattered, my screen time habits. When I'm bored, out comes the phone. When I'm frustrated, the same is true. And when I am overwhelmed or looking to avoid a task, I instinctively reach for a screen. Quite simply, these bad coping mechanisms are decimating my ability to concentrate on tasks effectively. So I always ask my students this: what's the promise of the first premise? So based on this, they got to talk about their distractibility and, hone in on that and give textual support governing that concept. So let's see another one without a stem, because a lot of my students, especially late in the year, don't need them anymore. Unlike many of my peers, silence does not feel like punishment. Whether I'm reading a book, solving a puzzle, or working through a difficult assignment, I've learned that meaningful progress often occurs after the initial boredom wears off. Consequently, my ability to remain focused stems not from some superhuman attention span, but from a willingness to stay engaged when others would rather move on to something easier. So this kid's just talking about how they have the internal traits, they have the internal mechanisms to be successful. So what's the second premise look like? Here's where we get specific about ourselves and our reflection. During the Rubik's Cube station, this reality smacked me squarely between the eyes. After several minutes of twisting colorful squares into what looked more like abstract art than a solution, frustration began to set in. Without even thinking about it, my hand instinctively drifted toward my pocket in search of a phone that was not there. So I want specificity in this, like really crank the specificity. The impulse was almost automatic, as though my brain had been conditioned to seek entertainment the moment a challenge presented itself. A similar experience occurred during the Where's Waldo station. The first two illustrations were manageable enough, but the third had me completely stumped. Before long, I found myself counting ceiling tiles, staring at the wall, and mentally planning what I was going to eat for dinner rather than searching for Waldo. Instead of remaining engaged with the task, my attention wandered the moment success was no longer immediate. So this is an example of a conclusion, the link back to the prompt and the thesis. These experiences revealed an uncomfortable truth. I've become so accustomed to constant stimulation that even minor obstacles tempt me to mentally check out. Consequently, if I hope to strengthen my ability to focus, I must first break my dependence on screens and learn to sit with frustration rather than escape from it. So that's an example of like a full syllogism right there. Let me give you another example of a second premise. So again, this is where you get specifically talking about yourself. So I'm going to flip the coin here. During Focus Lab, this mindset became readily apparent. At the Rubik's Cube station, I spent nearly the entire 15 minutes wrestling with the puzzle, only to hear the signal to rotate just as I felt myself closing in on a breakthrough. Rather than feeling relieved that the station was over, I found myself wishing for 2 more minutes to continue working. The challenge had become less about solving the cube and more about seeing how far I could push my own thinking. A similar experience occurred during the still life drawing station. As I carefully sketched the contours of the fruit and experimented with shading, I lost track of time altogether. The room seemed to fade into the background as I became fully immersed in the task before me. While I worked, I could not help but notice some of my classmates fidgeting in their seats, sighing dramatically or abandoning the challenge mentally long before the timer expired. Their attention appeared fixed on the clock, whereas mine remained fixed on the activity itself. So we're at the conclusion here. So that second premise takes a little while. You got to flesh it out and again, crank the specificity. These experiences reinforce my belief that concentration is not merely the absence of distraction, but the ability to become deeply engaged in a task. Ultimately, those who learn to push beyond boredom and frustration are far more likely to experience the rewards that sustained focus can provide. So that's 3 paragraphs right there. Intro, 2 bodies. Let's wrap it up. How do you conclude this thing? I like to use stems in the beginning of the year. And I always give my kids the analogy that it's akin to a fireworks display. It's the grand finale, the all-encompassing, all-encapsulating moment. So when you start off the conclusion with, when it's all said and done at the end of the day, in no other words, coming full circle upon reflection, as is evidenced in hindsight, it sets you up for that. So one might look like this. Upon reflection, Cal Newport's assertion that attention is the new scarcity appears less like a prolificative observation and more like an undeniable truth. Whether I was reaching instinctively for a phone during moments of frustration or becoming completely immersed in a still life drawing, Focus Lab revealed just how differently individuals respond to challenge and boredom. Ultimately, sustained concentration is not a matter of intelligence, but a habit, discipline, and perseverance. In a world overflowing with distractions, those who learn to guard their attention will possess a skill that is becoming increasingly rare and increasingly valuable. So just 3 or 4 sentences for that conclusion paragraph. And that takes us through the whole essay and the entire focus lab. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me at teachingwritingcoach@gmail.com. I love creating stuff like this. This is what keeps me engaged as a teacher. If you have any ideas, run them my way. I'm always looking to expand my repertoire, but I hope you enjoy this one and that your kids can really hunker in and learn something valuable. So that's it for now. I'll see you on the flip side.